Welcome to Bleav in Celtics. I'm your host, Warren Shaw, and as always, alongside me is the great Gary Washburn. Gary, it's great to see you, man. We got a special show here, but how are you doing first and foremost?
Oh, really good, really good. Season's coming to a close, regular season, and we're starting to see who's going to play who in the playoffs, and the weather's getting a little better outside. So, yeah, this is kind of a fun time, obviously. NCAA was a real fun tournament to watch. And that's over now. We're getting kind of the early season of baseball, but this is when the NBA makes its name, and we're going to have a lot of interesting stories to talk about over the next couple of weeks.
We absolutely will. But ironically, the Boston Celtics here don't have that much to talk about because they're waiting. They've clinched the Eastern Conference. They're chilling, 14 games up, like nothing to worry about there. And they have no idea who their first round opponent is. And it gives us an opportunity to talk about a couple of other things here on our show, on our platform, and to get to bring in, a great friend of mine here on the other side of this break. And we'll talk about that. But as always, you know what you got to do. Give our show a 5-star rating on whatever podcast platform you're listening us to on. Make sure you follow Gary at G Washburn Globe. Make sure you're checking out his writing at the Boston Globe as well, too. Follow me at Shaw Sports NBA and follow Bleav at Bleav Network and Bleav Sports. So, Gary, we won't waste any time on the other side of this break. Great special guest, Celtics fans. I think you're going to enjoy this one. We'll be right back. And we're back here in Bleav in Celtics. And today we are joined by one of the best long-form journalists in sports. I'm happy to call her a friend, Mirin Fader from The Ringer. Mirin, thank you so much for joining us. It's great to see you again.
Oh, it's so good to see you, friend. Thank you.
Man, well, the reason you're joining us here because you happen to write a great article on one of the Celtics' newest acquisitions in the offseason. Obviously, he's been here now throughout this regular season, but doing a great thing in Jrue Holiday. Article called Jrue Holiday's Season of Change, on The Ringer, came out about a week ago as we're recording, and we wanted to dive into that article. So I'm going to kind of go ahead and start off, but before we get into the article itself, I wanted to ask you some broad stroke things about you and your thoughts on Jrue Holiday in general. You follow all sports. You've been in this game for a little while here now. When Jrue was acquired by Boston in September, October, late September, early October, what were your initial thoughts there, just as a fan of sports in general?
I mean, I was shocked. Like, I've been watching Jrue for a long time. I'm based in LA. Throughout his college years, I remember at UCLA, I heard that first year at UCLA, but, really just high school coming up here and all those years. And he was just somebody that I've always watched and respected, like people around the league. I know him as this beloved figure. And so when he was traded, I was shocked because I thought he had reached that kind of untouchable status, right? Where a player shows, they are so crucial to a title winning team that there's no way you trade them. And so I was pretty shocked.
Gary, I'm going to kind of throw it over to you as well, too. But, G and I have talked a little bit about his role this season, right? And I think we know he's important, but I don't think statistically, it hasn't been the impact that some Celtics fans kind of have wanted to see. But, Gary, even kind of throwing it to you, then if you have a question for Marion, goes going to tap in, just your thoughts on his off the court impact on the team this season.
Well, he is with us. He's been a very quiet, reserved guy. I mean, he's a total professional. You see guys, and obviously when they hit over 30 in the NBA, they know that they have a job to do, that the media is part of their job. And he's obviously been through a lot with his family. I saw his family at the game last week. Not only his wife and his children, but his dad, and I think his mom was there. And obviously dad with 3 NBA sons, which has to be a huge source of pride. We kind of overlooked that Jrue has 2 other brothers in the league and with interesting roles, right? Aaron plays pretty well in Houston. He's played a lot this year. Justin's kind of bounced around the league, but is also kind of a 3-point specialist. So I think it's a huge source. It has to be a huge source of pride for Mr. Holiday. So my question is just kind of, what did you get? What kind of vibe did you get from Jrue as far as his personality? How did you view him maybe before you got to know him and then now afterwards?
Yeah, everything you just said, total pro. I felt that so much, in my interview with him. And I knew he was going to be like that, well-respected, player that respects media. But I just found him to be so thoughtful and just so classy and so just such a stand-up guy, right? he has every reason to say whatever he wants to say about the Bucks, and I just admired how positive he was about the entire thing. Everywhere he goes, people rally around him because he's genuinely well liked, and I think he uses every opportunity when he does do these rare moments, of profiles to just amplify team. And every time I would ask him something about himself, he would bring it back to the team. And I think, in so many of the interviews I did, especially, with the two brothers, like you both mentioned, everyone always says it goes back to the foundation. So I really appreciated, Gary, that you brought up his parents, because that literally every single interview, every single person was like, they are the way that they are because of their parents, that foundation, that faith. So all the classy demeanor that you see now with Jrue and everything, like he's been like that his whole life.
Mirin, so I think there's a lot of athletes who like, hey, I'd love for her to do a piece on me. But how did you select Jrue? I mean, I think, as Jrue is obviously a stand-up individual, but I think even to have someone like you, covering him as well too. How did you make that selection? Because you don't write about everybody, and it's not even possible for you, because again, it's long-form content. You got to spend days, weeks, and a lot of time gathering information, talking to people. How did you select Jrue Holiday for your latest feature?
Yeah, I love profiling interesting people who go through interesting changes in their lives. And this profile was all about change. I think for me to profile somebody, there has to be something compelling from a human interest standpoint. I want people to read the story if they know nothing about basketball. I feel like there's so many amazing writers here in this podcast alone, and so many in the NBA space. I just try to find stories that are slightly different. While everyone was focusing on the shock of the Milwaukee trade, I wanted to get into more like what prepares a person to endure something like that. So instead of lingering on the minutia of what happened, where he was, how, sad it was, I wanted to know why his resilience is built the way that it is. I wanted to know why he was able to so seamlessly handle such a transition. And then the story just became so much bigger than, the Milwaukee moment. It actually went all the way back to, family struggles and things like that. So I think for me, it was a no-brainer wanting to profile somebody as talented as Jrue, but really somebody as thoughtful as Jrue. I'm at the place now where I just feel like I don't want to profile people that don't have interest in the profile and the wonderful things that can happen from a great conversation. And Jrue is such a person, especially towards the end of his career, where I feel like those players are more reflective and thoughtful. And I just thought he would be a fantastic interview, and he was.
I'm going to follow up real quick before I throw it over to Gary for maybe his next question. But with his family being so grounded, in that as well too, I would imagine. I don't have the pleasure, I'm Gary flies really high to the sun, like that. He's there with the team and all that. So I don't have the pleasure of really knowing the intricacies of all that, and not necessarily even just the family, but the people around them, right? And who these players surround themselves with. So when you say, hey, I want to do this feature, and this is somebody I wanted to write about, what's that process like for you? What was it like specifically with Jrue, like reaching out to his people, his agent, or whatever the case would be, and then trying to line everything up so that you can get the content you needed for this article?
Yeah, Gary, I'm sure you relate to this. When we have an ask, we just fire on all cylinders. We're like, okay, who, the agent, the PR, this person, that person, the middleman, this person. And so for me, it's like just reaching out to every single person. And we really actually didn't think the story was going to come together because you didn't hear back for a while. But Celtics PR is really good. I think one of the best in the league, honestly. And so they help make that happen. I like doing all my secondary interviews, honestly, before the main interview. And so, like, if you notice, Jrue trains with this trainer, Mike G, Coach Mike G, Guevara. And it was so interesting talking to him first before the interview and sort of getting his take and, going through the types of training and things that they do. It helped me sort of formulate in my mind that this story has to be not just about change, but longevity. What does it take physically? What does it take mentally to have the career that Jrue has? So when I start my profiles, I'm like thinking of these big picture themes, like, okay, yes, we want to touch on this season with the Celtics and why he's so, crucial to this team and why he fit in so seamlessly. but what's the bigger picture? What are the values that Jrue holds? What are the experiences that Jrue has up to this point that allowed him to flourish the way that he has?
G?
Yeah, it's interesting. Like Jrue is just so funny. Jrue's such a smart guy. And not to say that one and dones aren't smart, but he seems to be mature beyond his years. Like even when he was in the league at 19, I mean, he literally, I mean, you really had to remember his career at UCLA. Not to say he was a bad player. He was a great player at UCLA, but it was only for 1 year.
Mm-hmm.
And then he comes out and he goes to Philly, and people were kind of forget the Philly years where he was kind of a young prospect for the 76ers before he got traded. I think on draft night, and the whole Anthony Davis, and when they drafted Nerlens Noel, and they moved him to New Orleans. But what struck you about Jrue that might be different than other athletes? I mean, obviously he's been in the league a long time. He's got the staying power. He's very grounded. He's a family man, unlike a lot of NBA players. I mean, who now some are married, some aren't, some have different personal lives. But what struck you about him that might have been different than other athletes that you interviewed?
Well, I really like that you brought up the Sixers, because one of the anecdotes that I Bleav was cut from the piece. You'll have to let me know if this sounds familiar at all, but I interviewed Aaron McKie for the story, and he's, a Sixers assistant coach when Jrue was young and in the league. And we were talking about how, yes, he's such a kid. He watched cartoons. I know that was in the piece. And, he didn't have a jacket. California girl, I relate. But there was one anecdote that McKie said where Jrue would want to play people like 1-on-1, 3-on-3, like on game days, like full speed before a game. And McKie would be like, you have to play a lot of minutes later. And he'd be like, oh, it's fine. Like, I'm ready. And I just found that to be like, he's such a gamer. And I think that I don't really always see that in athletes. Sometimes people sort of get swept up in an NBA career because they were tall, because they were good before. There's a lot of reasons, but they don't actually have like desire. Jrue has such a physical, palpable desire to be on the floor. Like the joy he has for the game and the passion is so infectious. And I just love that anecdote so much. And, then Aaron was saying that, like, there were times they would say to him, hey, like, we're going to use you a lot of minutes. We know you got to play a lot of defense for us, but we want you to also reserve some for you to like shoot the ball and make sure you have your legs under you. Mm-hmm. And Jrue was like, yeah, but I got to take care of other people first. And Aaron was just like, as a rookie, to hear that, to have him be so, as you said, Gary, like wise beyond his years, mature, was astounding. So I think the combination of just competitive desire and also just maturity, I've never really seen that combination so often as I do in Jrue.
The anatomy of a story is so interesting to me. And I think as you've been touching on it, right? You went and spoke to people before you spoke to him. How many people? And I think it's just like, it's like, I'm sure you can Wikipedia who's all the people, but like there's a lot of people who's touched. And what was that response like? It's like, hey, I'm doing a feature on Jrue. Like, I'm sure people were just like raising their hand. Oh, I'm happy to talk about it. But right. Talk to us a little bit about that process, how many people, and kind of the response when, reaching out about the story initially.
I know it was over 10 people. I can't remember the exact number, but I definitely reached out to way more than I actually got. But people were very excited to talk about him, like Andre Iguodala in particular. And he's just, you just feel the pride in Andre's voice, like how much like respect he has for Jrue. And it's funny, the anatomy of the story was interesting. So, like I said, I didn't think this story was going to happen. Like Jrue was supposed to, we were supposed to do the interview, and it just like didn't happen, or kept getting rescheduled. And then finally it happens. And then the Bucks are going to play the Celtics like 3 days later. And so we were like, you got to do the story. So it runs that day. So I scrambled 2 days, interviewed people. And then Giannis was out that game, and we decided to not run it. And they were like, okay, sorry you had to do this in 2 days, but go back, report more, add more, and really take your time with this story. So originally it was like, I didn't have Brad Stevens at first originally. And so I had to go back and do more reporting and like really flesh it out. So I am so thankful Giannis didn't play that game, because the story ended up being so much deeper when I had time to like really sink my teeth into it the way that I wanted to, and just get more and more people. And we rewrote the story like 4 times because originally it did start with the trade, the moment he found out he was traded, but then he went on the Draymond Green show, and then I was like, oh, it sounds too similar. So I was like, okay, let me just play Twister with the story. And so it turned out leading with the Lauren stuff and the family trauma. And I actually like that it ended up that way, because I think that is what it's really about, and that's what it all goes back to. And it just goes to show you, like, there's not one way to do a story, and you got to be really nimble, and you've got to shift and be flexible. And a lot of people think we're just like, taking our time 2-3 weeks with a story, but sometimes it's literally like 2 days. Go crazy, figure it out.
Gary, anything to add there? Because I see you nod, and obviously you're in this space on a regular basis. And
interesting. I was going to ask Mirin, because it's interesting, like the whole Draymond, because what I think we're dealing with now in our industry is that players are like the whole player podcast kind of craze, right? Which is great. But like, I heard so many things from Jrue in that podcast with Draymond Green that he has not said all season. And players now are becoming way more comfortable talking with JJ Redick or Draymond Green. Like, they're giving stories that they would not give us reporters. Like, they're loosening up. They're just chilling. They're way comfortable, where when there's cameras and there's cell phone cameras and iPhone cameras and all that, and they're standing in front of their locker, they're more like, okay, let me minimize this. Let me get this out of the way. Let me get this over with. Let me be polite. Let me answer all the questions. Is that becoming more of a difficulty especially Jrue? Jrue is what I've found is a very guarded. I had not dealt much with him for all the years I've covered the league. He's not someone I really dealt with all that much during his career. So he's a very polite man, very mature, like all that. But getting him to open up, getting him to be like, oh yeah, has not happened. Like, he's not hey, how you doing? But he's not the guy that after a month he's going to loosen up and say, hey, what's up, man? Oh yeah, tell your stories, or oh, when I was at UCLA, this happened. He's a reserved person. How did you kind of try to crack the code with him? And when you saw the Draymond podcast, are you like, oh wow, he really like opened up? And because he told the story about his parents rooting for the Lakers, and we're coming, using his tickets, and then coming with Laker jerseys on. He's like, really, y'all, like, using my tickets I got you at crypto.com, and you guys are rocking Laker jerseys. Like, come on, man, y'all gotta, like, which is stuff that's fun and great,
right?
Obviously, but what was it like to kind of try to get closer to him and have him get comfortable with you? Because obviously a lot of these guys are guarded.
Yeah. And a lot of times, I see that as the work, providing a comfortable space where people can feel like they can open up to me. And I think that was also the allure with this profile, is there just really hasn't been one. And he, like you said, so polite, so awesome, so respected, but just has not done something like that. And so I think for me, the process was knowing that, like, I think just like players can tell when a coach is not genuine within like a second, they can tell when a journalist is not genuine within a second, and they can tell when a journalist just wants a soundbite about Milwaukee or not. And for me, like, I don't care about that stuff. Like, I want the human story. And I think part of what allowed him, I think, in my opinion, to open up in the piece was asking things that were coming from a genuine place of curiosity, of empathy, of learning, of respect, understanding what he's been through with his family. And I think because I didn't talk about the trade that much, I felt like he respected. I really wanted to know about his experience in Boston and what it's like to be sort of this chameleon, sort of adapting wherever you go. So I think it's like in the way you ask questions and how you ask it. And then, of course, when you ask about the trade, which I did, it was attached to all this other stuff, like, hey, this is part of your journey. It's not your full story, but it's part of it. And I think giving that context just really allowed him to, I don't know, just open up and feel comfortable in that space. With the Draymond thing, I was very surprised, because I do expect players to go on podcasts all the time, but he's like the one that like never does anything. So it was like, oh my God, my piece is coming out in like 2 days. What the heck? But I'm not upset with it at all. I kind of have come to look at it as like, when we talk about our media diet, like there's a lot of things like I myself, like, okay, morning routine, New York Times. Okay, I listen to this podcast on Wednesdays. And, I have my lots of things that are part of my menu. I don't think there's anything wrong with our menu expanding. And so I think we should just look at it like that, not a replacement of our work, but an addition to our work. It's really interesting. But you do have to then act accordingly. So I couldn't do the profile the way I originally did it. I had to make it different. I had to make it seem fresh because everyone had that quote about I was surprised about the trade. So even though I too had got the same thing, his came out first. So you have to change it. So I think people do not realize how hard our jobs are, because they don't realize that you're trying to stand out in a crowded stadium of hundreds of journalists. And so everything you do has to be unique.
We're chatting with Mirin Fader from the Ringer. Mirin, last couple of ones before you let you slide out of here. One of the things, again, you touched on it here too, is like the story begins, we're talking about Lauren, and his wife and all that she went through, so to speak. Now, a lot of times as you're touching, like you're talking about, as you talk to players, you talk to anybody, certain thing sparks them, certain things you say, oh, you see them recess, back and like, oh, they don't want to talk about that. What was your experience, I think, with Jrue when talking about his family and maybe even some of that hard time where that kind of opened the story?
Yeah, like I, of course, knowing coming in that like not only is it hard to talk with anybody about something like that, something so traumatic, but especially him, somebody who is a little bit more guarded. So it was like I approached it just like, is it okay if I ask you about this? I feel like this part of your life is probably so important. It shaped all that came after. And, I try to not include myself in interviews at all. Like I really don't, I'm not in my stories, I'm not the writer that's like, we were eating a salad at blah, blah, blah. Like we were in the elevator, like that's not me. But in this case, I, without getting too much into it, like I went through a really scary like family health scare a couple of months ago, and it's fundamentally changed me. And I just simply brought it up to him in a way that I felt was not intrusive, or in a way that wasn't distracting from the focus on him being the main character. But I just sort of said, hey, like I understand that change is so random, and life can be one way one day, and then you wake up the next day and it's totally different. And I feel myself approaching life differently. How do you approach life differently with that change? There's a before and after. And he was so kind about it. He was like, oh man, like, I'm sorry. Yeah. And then he went into his. So I think to me, like, that's the power of storytelling. That's why I got into this business, not to share my business, but to feel an authentic connection with the person that you're profiling. And when your own experience is relevant, to feel like there is a vibe enough to mention it, to make the story stronger.
Gee, I'm going to ask you this as well, too. So it's something that, again, I'm not nearly as accomplished as the two folks that I'm getting to podcast here with, right? But had some opportunity, to be in a locker room or two in my time. And I remember, especially earlier in my career, back when we were probably at Dime together, Mirin, like it was, in those earlier days, it's like, listen, you don't always be chasing the stories. You have to build relationship. You have to be a human first and foremost. And I just thought that was so interesting because, like, especially when I was young, and I'm I don't know if how long I'm going to be here. Will I get another chance to come back? You're kind of worried, but both of you are seasoned and you know what it is. Gary, talk to me a little bit about what it's like for you to relationship build within the locker room, especially with somebody like Jrue. Like I said, maybe you can't always get there and cross that proverbial bridge and be on that true, like, hey, we're going to have salads together type of situation. But what is it like to, like, hey, you know what? We're just talking. This isn't something I'm trying to write for a story.
Yeah, it's difficult nowadays because I think players, well, first of all, NBA players are easier because they've been covered since they were AAU players. Most of these athletes are accustomed to being when they were in college, the 1 year, the 2 years, 3 years, they were covered by media. So by the time they get to the league, they've been covered before. So they're more comfortable. Their contracts are guaranteed. So their lifestyles are, baseball players are more difficult because they don't make money till their 60th year, right? Unless you break arbitration and you get one of those, like Juan Soto deals or something. So they're more guarded. Basketball players are easier. However, when there is, they're also understand that people take stuff off phone interviews, listen in. Like there's so much, chaotic journalism that's occurred over the last several years that's made some of them not trustworthy. A lot of them listen directly to their agents. Talk to this guy. Don't talk to this guy. We need him to talk. You need to talk to him because he works for this network. So it makes the quote unquote common beat writer or the person's with a team every day a little bit more challenging because Jason Tatum might be okay with us, but he sits with Taylor Rooks or he sits with Malika Andrews and he's pouring his heart out. And your boss is coming to you like, how come you didn't get that? Yeah. And it's just sometimes it's about building relationships and knowing your limitations. I think at times you can't, they can, I think Mirin, they can read the hustle. They can know when you're trying to get close to them. Oh, let me ask you about your sneakers. Oh, that's a new clothing line. Oh, let me get some, like, I don't hustle the players. I think they're old enough and mature enough to understand that. You talk to them like men. You talk to them about things, Jaylen Brown, I think yesterday just finished observing Ramadan. I've been asking him about that because that genuinely interests me, right? And I think that's something, and we have a good off-the-record relationship. I'm not going to run and write, everything that he tells me. And I just think it takes time. I always say this job involves great people skills, and younger people lack that because they don't have to, because they have their phones and they have the Bumbles and all these dating stuff. They can contact each other through social media and through Facebook. Well, young people don't really use Facebook anymore, but like all these sites. And so their ability to communicate one-on-one, hey, how are you, is limited. But some of the young guys, the players who are in their 20s, you have to kind of come at them at like, okay, I'm a little older, so I'm not going to try to be your homeboy. Mm-hmm. But so there's certain things I'm not going to talk to you about, but there's certain things I can talk to you about. And you have to find that balance. And sometimes some athletes are open. I found like a young man who's coming back to Boston tomorrow. Friday, Grant Williams, amazing guy.
Yeah.
Hey, here's my cell phone number. Hey, how you doing? Hey, Gary, what's up? Knows our names. That's the easy job. And that was more prevalent before. Those guys knew your names. They read your articles. And if they didn't read your articles, their friends would read your articles or their mothers and then tell them, hey, that dude wrote that, or that young lady wrote that about you or whatever, so they knew your name. Now it's a little different. So you have to realize, okay, how do I get closer to this person? What kind of questions can I ask him or her? It's a total feeling out process. Mm-hmm. And if you come with the same method for every player, you'll fail. You have to, like when I was talking about Jrue is a veteran player. Usually the veterans, the 30 pluses, are more open because they've been around. Jrue's more guarded. I was like, okay, wow, Jrue's a quiet guy, not a vocal rah-rah guy. Some guys are vocal rah-rah when they're in the locker room and they're 34 and the other guys are 23, 24. But a guy like Al Horford, very very good, thoughtful guy, has a son in the locker room. His son's like 9, you could just see it. And so you feel him out for asking questions, and we have a respectful, he knows my name. So it's just honestly, I don't know if Mirin will agree. It's just every individual separate. Like you can't treat Donovan Mitchell like you do Jalen Brunson, like you do, like they're all different. I think we come into this thing that these millennials are all the same. All they do is listen to Drake and they get on TikTok, but a lot of these guys are very different. They might dress the same. And I was watching some of the Blazer players and they're all 22, come out the locker room the other night, and I was like, my goodness, some of the stuff they were wearing. Like,
You can pull it off, G. You can pull it off.
It's a lot. It's a lot to see what young men, what's fashionable for them, being born in 2001 or whatever, because a lot of these, I mean, the 2000 kids are already in the league. So they've been in the league for a few years now. So you shake your head and I'm not going to ask Scoot Henderson, hey, where do you get those pants at? I want to know. Like, he's going to look at me like, come on, come on, OG. What are you doing? So that's not going to happen. So I would have to figure out a different way to get the scoop, whether it be getting to know his parents, whether it be asking them about his experiences, so every player is different. It's more of a challenge, but it's an awesome challenge because it does challenge your people skills, your journalistic skills, your reporting skills, etc.
So before we close out, and I'm enjoying this one. That was clippable. So you might find that one. You might find that one.
You ain't gonna see me dressing like Scoot. Like I'm not gonna be asking Scoot.
I need this to happen.
He ain't that for his age. I'm sure he was looking smooth. But we ain't talking about Michael Jordan and Vince Carter in the 90s. Those days
the Steve Harvey suits are done.
Those days are over. Yeah.
Different time. Gary, you touch on Al, and Mirin touches on Al in the piece as well too, and it's so interesting, right? So guys who are like similarity in terms of their personality, quiet, reserved, family orientated, and Al had a lot of respect, for Jrue, especially coming into the situation, as Al has also left the team, came back, and has had to accept a different role. And Jrue is doing very much of that at a slightly higher level than Al, but having to accept a different role specifically. So before we close out, just your sense of, Holiday's willingness to sacrifice. And I'm going to close out and then kind of kick it to Gary as well too. I think he recently became extension eligible. Mirin, what sense did you get, if any, of his willingness or want to maybe even stay in Boston, especially what all that he's been moving around here in the last couple seasons?
Well, he brought up the fact multiple times in our interview that he likes these guys. Like, he genuinely likes being around them. He even told me, like, they play a trivia game. Like, it's just the most nerdy, wholesome tidbit I found. And that they, like, go to dinner. And, like, Gary, you know this from covering the league as long as you have. Like, a lot of guys don't talk to each other. It's like, goodbye, see you the next day. I don't know. I don't have intel. Gary would know way more than me, but I just feel like Jrue seems to really like these guys, and that matters a lot.
G, close us out on that one.
Yeah, I think that obviously, if you want to get into the logistics of salary, the Celtics would be best suited to, they're in that second apron. They're living in the Golden State, neighborhood in terms of paying money. With Jason about to make $330 million next year, they would be better suited to sign him to an extension to keep this team together, because they're not going to get anything better. Letting him walk won't help them financially in the least bit, right? And you have Al Horford, who signed for another year at $10 million. Kristaps has already signed an extension. So I think even if they don't get it done this year, and I think they have a great chance. I think the security of that is we can run this back, and we have the same team essentially. They'll make some tweaks and changes around, but with bringing Jrue back brings, I think, a security, and he's aging well in the league too. And I think that's the one thing that I think anyone would agree on. He hasn't lost it. When you hit your early 30s, and I think that everybody expects everybody to be LeBron. Like, LeBron is a unicorn. There's not going to be many 39-year-olds, and I don't care how much modern technology and medicine is going to occur in the next 25 years, but 39-year-olds playing at that level. And that when you hit your 30s, that could be the slowdown time. And for some players, it is. For Jrue, I think he maintains himself. He takes great care of himself. And I think the fact of being a family man, not having probably the nightlife for many years, because he's been married and been with Lauren a long time, obviously since UCLA. It's like he's lived a calmer life. So there's not as much off-court, things taken out of him as some other players. I think it'd be. I think he wants to come back. I think the team would definitely bring him back and try to run it back again if they win it this year to try to repeat, or if they don't, make some tweaks, bring him back because he's still in his prime, and I think that's the important thing. He's aging well. He takes good care of himself. Very mature. We're not talking about other guys. We're not talking about James Harden here or anything like that. We're talking about a guy who just. I don't know if Jrue has any enemies in the league. And as we've seen, and sometimes it's been fun to read on social media, some of these guys don't like each other. We see it on the court. We see it in social media. Some of these guys don't all jersey swap, but I don't know of any player in the league that has any issue or has had any issue with Jrue Holiday. I just don't know any player. Anything I've heard of him has ever been on a negative side. I don't think he has one enemy in the league.
Well, I think that's a great place to wrap, Gary. And I think, that supports everything Mirin has been able to do within her story, high quality individual, high character. And yeah, those clubs and that life, that takes years off your life and definitely off your playing career for sure. So, that Jrue has been able to avoid that for the most part and maintain a great relationship, I think, with everyone in the league, executives as well, to coaches. Like that really is a testament. And I think as the Celtics continue their journey to being kind of like a culture setting team in a way that some people have started to question, and I think it's shifting back to the positive for them, bringing in high quality guys like Al and Jrue specifically bolster that, for the future. Man, thank you so much. And when we talk about bringing people back, you are definitely somebody who we absolutely need to bring back, here in the future, whether it's a Celtics article or not. G and I just like to talk about the league. So, I think in any, your next feature, happy to bring you back on and chop it up. Please check out our article. Check out our book on Giannis that came out a couple years ago now? No, it's like dog years, but time is flying.
Talk about getting,
man. But it was an absolute banger. And she continues to be one of the best journalists in our game. And you know what it is with my guy, Gary Washburn. For Bleav in Celtics, again, I'm Warren Shaw. Follow me at Shaw Sports NBA. Make sure you follow Mirin at Mirin Fader. Follow Gary at G Washburn Globe and all the other socials out there. We'll catch you next week here on Bleav in Celtics. Mirin, thank you so much. We'll catch y'all